this is unusual. Number 6. In my early 20s, I worked 24 hours as a gravedigger at Walmart. I worked in the toy department at the back of the store. I worked mainly by myself. Sometimes a friend would help with the stock. But if we're not heavy on the frame, you've done your job and come home at 7 a.m. The first time we met the person I met, we finally called Rathman. In the middle of the summer, I worked in this store for 2 years. He would come in around 5 a.m. and look at the Hot Wheels cars. He was a collector. There seems to be this group of men in their 50s and 60s who like to capture these cars. I usually put the trash in the back bins, and he never talks or sees me, but I would see him come and go. I went down that road one morning when I came upon his 97-cent treasure. He took 2 inches from my face and introduced himself. I seriously couldn't tell what his name was, but I think he was about 5 feet tall, overweight, and in my late 50s. His breath can only be described as rotting garbage mixed with onions or something. He literally had the worst breath, and he would come right up to your face. Our first meeting was just your average fortress. Maybe that guy at the bar doesn't want you to feel that way. Honestly, until he started showing up to grab me on the sales floor. He would come up behind me and startle me, put his hand on my shoulder, or offer to grab the box I was packing and hold it. In front of her crotch, mind you, I took things out. I was very young and stupid then. I didn't know how to handle strong men, and to be honest, I've had a few guys beat me up before. For that, I would never see them again. I thought he was a fortress until one morning he came up to me and asked me out. Oh boy, here it goes. I'll have to try this guy and hope it goes away. He came to me and said, "I saw that you like to eat at Chinese buffets. You were with your friend yesterday. I want to take you there. You love fresh fruit and stir-fry spoons." What? I've never met this guy, but my friend and I were having lunch one day before we entered. Was he looking, and I didn't see him? He must have watched me eat. The place was very empty that day. My friend and I always followed the lunch group because he was nervous and didn't like eating in really busy places. I froze and didn't thank him. I was too busy. I was a little worried, but he only left me in the morning. The next day, I didn't see him at the store. Then I left for 2 days. This Friday, when I got back to work, he watched Hot Wheels at 5 a.m. I ran after him, and I had my supplies. He stared at me, so I called my friend on the phone and asked him for help. He knew what was going on with this guy, so he packed the way he got there. I continued to work and thought he was gone, so I pushed my cart into the spare room, and as I was about to turn the corner, he came through the door and grabbed my hand. I turned back and told him not to touch me. He scared me. He said he was sorry and he was looking for me. He wanted to know that I always come in on Wednesdays and Thursdays and I wasn't here. I lied and told her that my days change often. He then tells me he didn't think it was true because every Thursday afternoon I go to H-E-B with an older woman in a green car. This guy was looking for me. I went shopping with my mother on Thursday afternoon. I broke up with this guy in the conversation. The next day he came in again, came up to me and asked me to lunch. I told him no, I was too busy. I didn't want to meet and left. He and my friend had some small talk about how young girls like to dance near him. All in all, it was hilarious and we thought it was a pervert. My friend nicknamed him Ratman. One day after work at 10 a.m., I was getting ready for bed when my phone rang. This was long before everyone had a cell phone. I was about to cover up and leave, but I got out of bed and answered the phone. The voice on the other end of the line jolted me. It was Ratman. "Hi, Sally. I hope I didn't wake you. I want to know if you're going to the movies with me today." I yelled at him. "How did you get my number?" He tells me that my friend gave it to him and that I have a secret crush on him and I'm not ashamed to tell him. I know my friend wouldn't do it. I was hooked and asked my friend the next night. He got angry and said he would never do that. At that time, my boss was sitting at the lunch table with us. He overheard our conversation and asked what was going on. Finally, I found out that my boss had called me yesterday at the store at 9 a.m., asking me to check on my employment and asking if I had my current number on file. This was long before security measures were put in place, and you couldn't just call up and ask if there was any work. So my boss thought I applied for a new job and gave this idiot my number. This rat person kept calling and harassing me. The next day, on my day off, he called at least 30 times and left me messages on my answering machine, even crying and yelling, asking why I didn't love him, then calling back and leaving messages about our trip. We were going to get together in Mexico, and he couldn't wait to see me in the new suit I bought. The young man was wise. A few times after that, I would be at the grocery store or the mall, and I would look at it and see it in the grocery aisle or the same store where I was shopping. I called the police to no avail and changed my number. Finally, he stopped entering the store. My boss said he'd take him if he came in, but my boss was transferred out of state, so this guy would be one hit after another. I switched departments and stopped collecting toys. I moved away a long time ago and still keep in touch with a friend I met at Walmart. 5 years ago, he still walked into said store, older but still hot, and started harassing another young girl who worked there. 5. This happened to me 3 years ago. It was the first day of 9th grade, and I was walking out the door. My grandfather had a huge truck that looked like an ice cream truck. The car was completely obstructing the left side of my driveway. As I walked closer to Grandma's car, she was still locking the house. I could hear a very faint voice. I didn't recognize the song at the time, but now I know it's Janis Joplin's "Piece of My Heart." I turned around the side of the van to see a woman with horrible, frosty, dark brown hair. He drove the van almost sexually. At first, I didn't think he saw me, but before I could call for help, he started talking without looking at me. It was not unusual for us to be offered to buy a van because it was so cool. But I knew Janis Joplin was dead a long time ago. At this point, I am very confused, so I look for my grandmother, who for whatever reason has returned home. I thought he forgot his cigarette as usual. As I looked back at the woman, she took full liberty of getting into my face. So close that I could smell his earthy breath as if he was eating soil. This woman was really unhealthy. I saw what he was wearing. She had on a white nightgown like the one she wore at the hospital, and her hand was covering the dog tag around her neck. His eyes were so pale blue that I thought he might be blind. As a 14-year-old girl who was afraid of everything, I lost all reason and tried to get him back into his backyard. I felt this woman's cold, clenched hand squeeze my wrist so hard that it hurt. "Do you like to shake and roll, little lady?" he whispered in my ear. That was the last straw for me. I yelled for the grandparents to come outside, and before I knew it, my grandfather came walking out, threatening to call the police, saying he was armed. Unfortunately, I didn't see the last of Janis Joplin. After school that day, I watched TV in my room and did my homework. For the next few hours, I was home alone, and it was normal for me. A few days ago, my house had a yard sale, so our things were lined up on tables in the yard. This is how we always put our things, especially when we plan to open soon. We never had a problem with it. I start to hear a throb, then the glass snaps together. I look out the bathroom window overlooking the backyard and see the famous lady Janis Joplin laying our things on the grass. I was scared, but I felt safe being in my own home, so I yelled at him to stop or call the police. It didn't scare him. He ran to the window and started cursing at me. He looked like a rabid animal. I ran into the kitchen where the phone was, start dialing 911, but the phone rings. I answer him, and he is our family friend. He asks if I'm okay and calls the police because he saw a woman in the yard while driving. I thank him, and he says he will come back and help me talk to the police. This woman came out of a mental institution a few blocks from my house. The tag that spoke to him was his ID. When the police arrested him, he tried to cut them with one of the broken plates. He attacked me and said he was going to cut my private parts. 4. In 2006, I was a sophomore in high school and the popular outcast. I had a lot of friends, but never really fit into any particular group, so I tried to surround myself with people who were in a similar situation. The beginning of that year brought a lot of new students, but one stood out to me and I knew we were meant to be friends. I'm not using real names here. Let's call him Derek. Derek was tall and quite large, but slightly muscular. He wasn't built on the side, but he had some muscle tone. He was one of the bad boys. He and his mom sat in front of my best friend Anne during our orientation, and we couldn't help but notice his short haircut and his many tattoos, which was unusual for me. Rich kid flunked high school, so we had to be friends with him. He quickly became the bad boy that every girl in school wanted, and he even attracted the attention of some of the older girls in school. One such girl in particular really set her sights on him. We'll call her Ashley. She was a year older than us, and a very popular girl. She was kind of a lonely girl, but at the same time she had a few friends and always had at least one guy by her side. Derek definitely had his eye on her, but at the same time, he also had a boyfriend. Next thing we know, he and Derek started dating, and we were so excited for them. Everyone was like that except Jason. He didn't like Derek to begin with, but when he stole Ashley, he stole something in Jason. He was a tall guy with no muscle tone at all, and if I remember correctly, he was very thin. When Derek and Ashley started dating, rumors about the two of them started spreading like wildfire. There were many rumors about her being raped and pregnant by Derek, and about Derek's past. We knew they were all lies, but most of the kids at school didn't think to do any research on it, and just blindly believed everything they were told. Things have been tough for Derek because people are constantly harassing him and trying to start fights with him. It was the middle of the year, and up until that point, Derek had never gotten into an argument with anyone, not even a physical one. But one day everything came to an end. Derek has come to school more than we've ever seen. We asked her what was going on, and she said that Jason wouldn't leave Ashley alone and called her over and over again over the weekend, and Derek had had enough. We tried to calm him down and try not to fight with Jason, but nothing helped. When Derek saw Jason get off the school bus, he approached him and punched him once in the face. Jason fell to the ground bleeding from his nose and mouth. From what the director told us, on the way to the hospital, he had a convulsion and was bleeding from his ears. Fast forward about a week, and Jason goes back to school. Derek was in jail, and it would be a month before he went back to school. Meanwhile, Anne and I stayed as far away from Jason as possible, and he did the same to us. The day Derek was supposed to go back to our high school, he stayed home really sick. That day is burned into my mind, and no matter how hard I try, I can't forget it. After lunch, they locked the school. No one was allowed to leave the classrooms, and no one knew why. We were off for an hour and a half, but let me tell you, it felt like 4 hours to me. Anne and I were in the same class, and I remember when we were locked out, we think one of our stoned friends got caught with weed or something. After closing time, our SRO, the school resource officer, came to our classroom and asked Anne and I to go with her to the office. When he got there, the director informed him that Jason had been arrested. He brought a loaded .45 and several knives with him to school. Another student was alerted when he saw Jason pull the handle of his gun out of the back of his pants as he bent down to pick up the backpack. And as if that wasn't scary enough, he took out a piece of paper and placed it in front of us. Jason had written a hit list. This kid was a junior in high school, and he had a hit list. Looking at the list, I remember reading: 1. Derek. 2. Anne. 3. Me. I remember just crying. As we laughed and walked away, there was a guy on a mission to kill us. When we caught him, he was outside the girls' bathroom near the dining room, which Anne and I visited every day. He had the first lunch, and we had the third lunch an hour and a half apart. The school was locked down, and he was arrested after lunch, just before the start of the second lunch. I don't know if he actually followed through on his plan or if he would have chickened out, but I do know that if he had, I wouldn't be here today. It's not something I think about every day now, but when I think about it, I feel the same panic when the list is put in front of me. Number 3. It happened in my room. When I was 10, I couldn't sleep all the time and spent most of the night tossing and turning. I was a horror movie fan when I was a kid, and fear was something I had no experience with. I wasn't afraid of the dark, and I wasn't easily distracted by strange noises or strange encounters, but I knew when to get the donkey out of the situation or find a trusted adult. I always slept with my closet doors closed, which will make some sense later in the story. It should also be noted that my family was in a very wooded area, some might call the middle of nowhere. One night around 1 p.m., I woke up to a noise coming from under the bed. One of my cats felt like something had scratched themselves with one of their legs or caused them to throw themselves under me. I had heard it many times before, and the source was always one of my foggy friends, so I didn't watch it this time. I closed my eyes and tried to continue sleeping. I turned to my left, which made me face the wall where the bed was pressed against. I heard a noise again, and thinking my cat was under me, good night, and I was able to sleep once more. The next time I woke up, it was a surreal and shocking sight. My bedsheet and comforter were not covering me. I saw a man standing on the bed, holding me and touching me with his finger, and his performance was truly terrifying. The boy couldn't make his friend laugh. He felt his fingertips brush against flesh, as if touching another person for the first time. What I saw was unbelievable, so strange that I believed I was dreaming. I tried to wake up from my dream, but to no avail. The seizure continued. It covered my chest, stomach, legs, and arms. Paralyzed and fearless, I cried out, "Wake up!" And with that, the man threw himself on the floor and closed his eyes, as if trying to convince me that he was asleep or dead. I have no idea. At this point, I realized I couldn't be dreaming. I somehow managed to move, and I jumped off the top of the bed onto the person on the floor next to me and ran towards my parents' room. When I got to their bedroom, something hit me. I told myself that all this was impossible, that no one could enter our house without entering, for we always locked every door and window at night. I've seen a lot of strange things in my house or gone to sleep. The third or fourth time I talked to my mom or dad about it, I realized that it was my mind. Do not ask why, dear listener, because I have no explanation to offer you. But I turned away from my parents' bedroom door and decided to hurry home for the break. I found nothing out of the ordinary. No broken windows or locks, no bent doors, nothing. I convinced myself I must be dreaming or hallucinating and blamed my obsession for it. I walked down the long, dark, and narrow corridor to my bedroom. I looked inside and saw no one. I turned on the light, got down on the floor by the door, and looked under the bed. Nobody. I checked both windows for signs of breakage, which there were none. Both windows are closed and locked. I knew. I could see things completely. I crawled back into bed and decided to watch TV to calm myself down and take my horrible thoughts away like a nightmare or hallucination. I turned on the TV, tuned to a channel that seemed boring, and placed the remote control on my bedside table. I lay on my right side, away from the wall I mentioned earlier. As I lay there, my eyes began to adjust to the dark room with the dim light from the TV screen. Off the TV, I saw something that made my heart sink to the pit of my stomach. Inside my closet, one of the doors now slightly closed, I saw someone standing perfectly still, facing the wall, hiding and waiting for me to sleep. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I looked at the man in my closet for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. I quietly got out of bed, hoping that the man wouldn't notice and that my father had hidden it in the closet. I once again made my way to my parents' bedroom. Still as calm as possible, I went inside. I shook my mom and dad at the same time, and when they woke up, I said, "Shh, don't make a sound. There's someone in my closet." My parents also jumped up and said, I repeated myself and asked to call 911. Mom immediately picked up the phone. Neither of my parents doubted my claim because I was always honest and open. They both knew I wasn't doing it or that I was wrong. I'm sure the look on my face made it clear that this was indeed the case. My father told my mother that I should go and look after him and urged us to stay in their room and lock the door. So we did. At this point, I was scared. I didn't know what this man was capable of, if he had a weapon, or if my father was alive. I sat in the living room with my mother and cried. After what seemed like hours, my father knocked on the door and told me it was him and that it was wrong to open the door. Mom opened the door and let Dad in. I said something. Did you get it? Dad looked at me with the most sad and confused look. He said, "There is no one there." I assured him that there was indeed a man in my room and that he was pushing me. My father checked every inch of the house and said he found no one. He also checked the doors and windows like I did. But then it hit me. He must have had a key. After saying this, my parents looked at each other in absolute terror. Our closest neighbor, our trusted and beloved friend, whom we considered family, had the key to our house because she regularly babysat me since I was a child. He was the only person other than my family who had a key to our house. Shortly after this discovery, the police came, took statements, searched our property, and left. None of us could sleep that night. The next day, my father went to my neighbor's house and asked if he knew where our house key was. He said yes, and when he went to show it to her, he found it wasn't there. His house showed no signs of break-in, and he always locked his doors and windows. My parents changed all the locks on our doors and decided not to give keys to anyone except in an emergency. I never discovered the identity of the man who hid in my room that night. I was traumatized by this incident, and it took me a long time to accept what happened and move on. My sleep problem turned into full-blown insomnia, and for about a decade I couldn't sleep without a light. It's been almost 20 years since that night, and apart from my parents, I've never told a soul about it. My heart goes out to anyone who has experienced trauma in their lives, and I hope you can all find peace with yourselves. 2. I'm a 32-year-old female, and I live with my mother in a very rural area. My house is surrounded by miles of forest on all sides, the only open space leading to our main road. Our closest neighbors on either side are family members, and you can't see our house from the road, so I didn't feel the need to lock the doors or even get fully dressed before going out. The trunk doesn't run out of pants, and I usually don't mind leaving the front and back doors open. During the day, he feels safe. But that has changed recently. It's really hot in my country. Over 100 degrees in summer is rare. We recently got a backyard pool. Unfortunately, I'm on medication that causes my skin to turn red if I go into direct sunlight, and the pool sits 3 hours before sunrise. It was my swimming time. For the first 2 days, I felt nothing but happiness as I swam, and I would be there before dark. About 3 days in, I started getting a little worried about staying in the pool after my mom left, or getting in without her. He usually came in with me because I was sick, and he was afraid of all the medicine I was taking. There was no logical reason why I felt uncomfortable. It was my own backyard, and no one could see me from behind the house. Not to mention that I have 2 indoor dogs that think there might be a stranger around. The last time I felt really scared, I was walking in the woods behind my house and realized that a mountain lion was looking for me. I had a terrible feeling that something was wrong with me, but I rationalized it. A week later, I stopped staying up after dark. I'm always inside when the sun goes down, so I finally realized that the human feeling of dread is called that for a reason. It's been about 20 minutes since my mom came out, and I've been doing it a few times in a row, but it's tiring. It's early. So I stopped swimming and turned my head back and sank into the water. Looking at the white clouds and the clear blue sky, it was really peaceful and relaxing. If I had been swimming underwater with my ears, I would not have heard. A soft cracking sound, like dry leaves crunching underfoot. I shot straight and looked around but saw nothing. I thought it was the dogs, so I swam to the side of the pool. Picking myself up, I looked away, a smile on my face and the dogs' names on my lips. But there was nothing there. Confused, I swam all over the pool and looked around for the dogs, but nothing. I was mostly convinced it was a shark and went back into the water when I heard it again. A gentle rustling of leaves followed by a snapping of a branch. It was coming from the tree line. I called the dogs again because they like to run in the woods. There was complete silence. I went back to the water at the edge of the pool and waited. Not a minute later, I heard it again, through the trees, directly behind me. I raised my head and looked in that direction. The voices stopped. I continued to watch. Unfortunately, I'm nearsighted and apparently didn't bring a glass to the pool. I saw that the trees were dull green and brown. I leaned back and hugged her, then stopped by the stairs. At this point, I'm sure my waterlogged body can leave quickly. Take the stairs, grab a towel and shoes, and enter the house. I told my mom what I heard, but like me, she thought it was the dogs, because they were out at the time. I told him no. 2 young Jack Russell Terriers couldn't make soft, slow-walking noises if their lives depended on it, and would certainly run when I called them. I think this mountain lion is roaming around and I shouldn't be back for the rest of the day to give myself time to clean up. They hit the shower to wash off the chlorine, and I pretty much forgot about it when I realized something terrible. The footsteps were indeed familiar, but I didn't place them where I heard them until that moment. They weren't footsteps, a 4-legged animal. These are more like things. I would do it on a return trip there. These were human footprints. I finished my shower as quietly as possible, and then told my mom, but she didn't believe me. Later, my cousin brought my dogs home. They spent most of the day playing with their dogs in his yard, certainly not in the woods. 2 days later, we had terrible storms. There is little rain, but the wind shakes the trees and thunders the house. I was wide awake from the first surge, laying in my bed and hoping it would be over soon. About an hour later, the power went out. Without electricity and all the background noise that no one cares about, it's very quiet, except for constant loud noises and thunder. Finally unable to fall asleep, I got up to find a flashlight and go to the bathroom. I took a step out of the room and froze. The sounds I heard were more than thunder. Someone stood on the back steps and pulled at the back door. The door may look like a normal wooden exterior door, but it's actually steel. The sound was that of an iron door on its metal frame, and it sounded like the sound of thunder. The layout of the house is basically my bedroom, the bathroom next to my room, and then the back door in the hall that leads to the kitchen. I was literally a stone's throw away from anyone trying to break into my house. I froze in place, my body cold and shivering. After a few more minutes of chattering, it stopped, and I heard angry footsteps coming down the stairs and into the woods instead of the road. I went back to sleep and hid under the covers like a scared little child until morning. Why didn't you wake up your mother, you may ask? Why didn't the dogs bark? Why didn't you call the police? Well, the power went out, and I knew the cell phone wasn't charged, so I ended up calling the police. My mother couldn't do anything, and has a bad record of not listening to me about dangerous situations. To be honest, I couldn't believe that it didn't make things worse, just to prove that no one was here. As for dogs, they fear nothing but thunder. They hide under the couch, and they always walk when it rains. Nothing else happened for almost 2 weeks. I didn't go back to the pool and the doors were locked at night, but everything is back to normal. One day I got up and headed for the shower. The front and back doors were open, but my mother was sitting in the living room in both rooms. I didn't feel safe taking a shower with the bathroom door closed but not open. Halfway through the shower, I hear a loud noise from inside the room. My first thought was the towers and they fell off the counter. I pulled back the curtain to check, but I was right where I put it. Then I noticed that the bathroom door was open. Someone opened the door so I could put the trash on top of the floor cabinet in front of the door. I thought it was my mom and went back to the shower. If he really needed it, he should have pushed it out of the can. When I came out, I couldn't find my mother or the dogs in the room. Well, maybe he opened the door for me to go somewhere and I didn't hear him. That's when he came in with the dogs and the mail. I asked her what she wanted and she told me that she would leave after she got in the shower. He landed on the mailbox and the dogs followed him. I didn't want to scare him or trust him again, so I told him I'd hear him say something and left it at that. But certainly not the one who opened the door. I realized who it was. They were trying to be sneaky and thought I was alerting them to an intruder while making a lot of noise, so they ran away. That was 3 days ago. I haven't called the police yet because I don't have any evidence. No one has experienced it but me. And while I'm certainly not an overly dramatic, attention-seeking liar, I have been painted in the past because of some mental and anxiety issues. Although I have contacted the police, I am sure there is nothing we can do to treat it. I made so many decisions when it came to forest tracks that this man didn't know I had bad eyesight. When I looked in their direction, the tracks stopped because they thought they would see me. When I turned around, they thought I wasn't there and probably thought I was swimming with my ears and couldn't hear clearly. Update. That evening, my aunt called the police and they were picked up by someone. I wasn't there at the time, so I don't know what it is, but it lives near me. It's too late now, but I'll ask him what happened and let everyone know what I know. Update. Okay, here's what I know. My aunt came home from work and found the gate to the forest road locked, the lock broken. The road is on his land, but is mostly used by a quarry on the other side of the forest. He started down the road to hear several gunshots coming from the woods. Being the smart lady she is, she called the police. When they arrived, they found a man in his 20s or early 20s in the quarry. He lowered the scout trailer and loaded some equipment onto the ATV. He was arrested, and the supervisor told my aunt that they had dealt with him before. The first 2 times he was a minor, he caused problems and they recovered the stolen items. So they let him go. This time they won't go, and he will definitely go to jail. Apparently, he also steals from my aunt's storage, knocks down fences around the property line, and generally makes a lot of noise. I think that if it was someone who was in my house, he would sneak in and steal from us and not notice that I was still there. Thinking back, I'm not sure if he saw my mother and I together. He must have thought that only one woman lived here, and when Mom went to get the mail, he thought the house was empty. The sound of the shower running probably confused him, so he opened the door instead of going straight to what he wanted to steal. He steals our property and causes problems for at least 3 years, without our knowledge. I think he was overconfident and careless and finally got caught. I really hope so, and not just stealing stuff from one place. The only thing left unexplained is what he was doing that night during the storm, pulling out our back door. Did he test to see if he could get in? It was midnight and both cars were in the front yard. He had to know we were home. I'll update again if there's anything else, but I'll say that's the end of it. I hope so. 1. My city is a very historic seaside town, where, I won't say, maintaining some sort of anonymity to protect the individuals involved, which ultimately includes me. As a result of the city's long and vibrant history, some parts of that history have fallen into disrepair. This makes my city a gold mine for urban explorers. There are various abandoned buildings in the city. 2 friends, and I'll call them A and B, and I, whose name is C in this story, traveled down the coast one day to have a barbecue on the beach with other friends. We passed what we thought was an active naval base. From a distance, the buildings looked precarious and still intact. The radars were still up, the windows in our corner were unbroken, and the place seemed generally uninhabited. However, what caused the double take was the lack of Marines or security personnel. Of course, the base is also protected as guards and staff are on duty at the front gate. But no, from our perspective, the place was devoid of human life. This prompted us to explore a little further and walk along the beach to get a more detailed picture. There were a number of buildings, mainly located along the seashore, to form some kind of plan. There were several small buildings and 2 large main buildings. 2 large main buildings, and most of the smaller buildings were grouped together with a second smaller building. The groups had to be about half a mile apart. All along the compound, you can clearly see the foundations of the ruined buildings. To the north of the compound, you can see the low roof that will eventually lead to another base lacking a barbed wire fence, which is still functional, with rotating radars and security personnel. The main entrance to the waste compound is via a gravel road that connects with the residential property to the northwest of the compound. We used to walk from this property to go to the west side of the joint to access the beach that runs along the south side of the joint and turns east of the joint. After a quick walk south of the complex, we confirmed that the place was empty. And looking at the inactive CCTV cameras and the loose cables that broke the windows on the beach, our suspicions were confirmed. This place is abandoned. Our exploration of the city went into overdrive, but we had to quickly curb that feeling because we wouldn't be able to go in and explore during the day because it's crowded, unequipped, and usually unprepared. So we decided to come back later that night. As night falls and we make our way to the compound, we experience a great sense of anxiety and excitement. This was probably our biggest urban exploration ever, and it was an incredible achievement to do it, but also a logistical challenge. Although this was a new set of buildings to investigate, we did not initially consider potential entry and exit points, or indeed the buildings themselves. We also wondered if other researchers would be interested, and of course if there were people who took up semi-permanent residence inside the buildings. Hell, I wouldn't think twice if I was homeless and looking for a roof over my head. Neither of us said anything about the paranormal aspect. None of our worries would stop us, and we would like to think about different situations from the past. We would be prepared for any situation that might arise. Approaching the app, we were immediately hypnotized by its darkness. While it was volatile and somewhat interesting during the day, it was the complete polar opposite at night. For a busy city with lots of lights and a serious pollution problem, all the elements combined that night to provide us with the ultimate feeling. Cloudless, quiet, isolated, and not light. I rarely saw my hand in front of my face until we even went inside. In order to prevent the burglary from being seen at this very early stage, we decided to turn off our torches and use our smartphone displays to scan the perimeter of the compound fence to locate entry and exit points. Our search took us to the middle of the southern and southeastern border of the compound, with the seashore giving way to the harbor on the eastern side of the compound. Although this entry and exit point was ideal in one respect, it was not near public roads. It was also on the downside, meaning that it was necessary to go further into the first main group of complex buildings. The entry and exit points were also tight, so it would take a lot of effort to enter the site. Being the smallest of the three, but also the most fearless and agile, I decided to try it out and go over the fence first to see if the other side was safe to drop. Apart from getting my jacket off on the first attempt, my entry was relatively smooth. I wasn't stuck. I had solid concrete under my feet to land on. After revealing everything to the other two, they began planning to introduce each other to A. A was the tallest of the trio, and despite being of medium build, he was the strongest and was able to pull the fence a bit more to guarantee his safe entry into the compound. Even though he was the same height as me, he was very busy and stuck at first. Finally, V. Even though he was the same height as me, he was very busy and stuck at first. He grabbed his jacket and demanded that A and I help him get in. As he entered, we watched as the entry point slowly bent into the shape of the fence, seemingly intact. Because it was so convincing, we decided to stick some reflective tape on the wall to show where our future exit was. Well, this time we were prepared, or so we thought. So far, the start of our quest has been uneventful, and we'd like to keep it that way. As the entry point brought us closer to a cluster of small buildings half a mile away from the main buildings, we decided to check them out first. From what I could see as I walked closer, there was no obvious entry point to the buildings, as there was a cardboard-like main entrance. So we decided to turn around. The buildings are actually built in an L shape, with one rectangular building connected to a smaller square building. All the windows in these buildings were gone, and there were only black holes in the abyss. However, we discovered that on the first floor of a square-shaped building, human-sized, there is no glass in our entry and exit. It was big enough for the three of us to ride comfortably, which was an ideal worst-case scenario. We didn't expect to be kicked out, mind you. Now that we were inside, we felt safe enough to light the torch. The window we climbed up turned out to be a small corridor with a door to the ruined toilets on the left and another room on the right. After passing through the door, we entered the main room of what we now believe to be a rectangular building. There wasn't much in this room except for the board in front of the door we entered. To the left and to the right, another planted door caught our attention the most, and a metal staircase leading up to another floor, even darker than the current one. Before we went any further, we all whispered how we felt and agreed on a general consensus to ditch ourselves as things were dark and quiet. We decided to turn off our lights, be quiet, and listen for movement in the building. But there was only deafening silence. By the sounds of things, we were completely alone. But I was not satisfied with the lack of sound and decided to involve everyone inside. I yelled to see if anyone was in the building, hoping there would be movement, but at the same time hoping there wouldn't be. The deafening silence continued, but now I felt a little more comfortable. We all walked cautiously towards the metal stairs and looked up in the darkness, with A taking the initiative by lighting a torch. A torch illuminated the roof of the upper floor. Through the darkness and thick mold that covered the ceiling, a low lid to our disgust was a drop of liquid. Faster than I wanted, I suddenly flashed the torch to B and I, both of us jumping. He quietly explained that he had a bad feeling about the quest and a voice in the back of his head to leave. This surprised me a bit, as A is usually very fearless, puts on a brave face, and rarely expresses concern when he disagrees with the group consensus. But I put it in our current environment because I felt like I was in the dark. This, while not a new sensation, is one that I haven't particularly liked or encountered very often. As B is usually the straight talker and the one making sense of the trio, B explained how we feel when we go to new places, but since we are well prepared for most things that can happen, we will be fine. This seemed to satisfy A, and then he climbed the stairs first, the torch rising above him, illuminating the ceiling above. His face looked different, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I didn't have time to think because I climbed the stairs to the top floor, and then B, when we all made the stairs, we shone our flashlights forward and were greeted by another corridor, narrower. We entered, 4 doors, 2 on either side. From our perspective, the 2 rooms on the left were pitch black, and the 2 on the right had little light from the city. Although the sight of some lights was a little soothing, they did nothing to dispel the darkness that enveloped us as we entered the first room on the right to see what was inside. We all froze for a moment as we processed what we had just seen. In the middle of the room, facing the window, was a wooden chair, which on closer inspection looked quite new. We all spoke quietly when we realized what he looked like, but we were all confused. Soon we had a small chain. We all stopped in our tracks when we heard the sound of a branch snapping from the dark room opposite. We all quickly turned our bodies towards the dark doorway and turned off the torch. Then, without moving, waiting for something to appear. The earth seemed to stand still at that moment. Not a muscle twitched as the darkness engulfed us all. 10 times as intimidating as before. Everyone was quiet once more, as no one dared to move or speak. After what seemed like an eternity of silence, I slowly began to approach the dark room. For 4 steps away, in fact, it seemed at that moment an endless corridor, for the dark door was above me. Finally, I made it to the door frame and listened intently. Nothing stirred. A lot of thoughts were going around now. If it was a person, they could be right next to me right now, and I wouldn't see them. They might be in position, ready to pounce on me. However, nothing stirred. I decided to be brave and slowly picked up the torch, hesitating to press the button. When I turned on the fire, I was afraid of what I would see. I could go back now, but curiosity is holding me back. I closed my eyes when I heard the flashlight click. I wasn't dead, so I slowly opened my eyes to see the light in the room ahead. Then what I saw amazed me. Nobody. There was nothing in the room, nothing that could have caused the rattling sound anyway, because there were no branches and nothing to pull the branch from. At this point, others came to see and were just as confused as I was about the commotion. Now I was a little more comfortable. I felt like we were a bit silly and didn't react to anything. The sound may be something outside. But sure enough, I started going behind the door to the dark room. But not before. I feel my heart skip 8 times, like in a split second I see something appear in front of me, smack me in the face and quickly disappear behind me. I felt my legs go numb as I crouched against the wall, stunned by what had just happened. It all seemed to happen so quickly, but it took ages for me to regain full mental capacity and process what had happened. I could tell that B was talking to me, but both the voice and the sight were the beginnings before slowly transitioning to English. Pigeon. B quietly yelled at me as I stood up. Among the things that would scare the crap out of me, it shocked me. Pigeon. I laughed to myself, and as I came to terms with my surroundings once again, I noticed something. "Where is A?" I asked B, who seemed surprised that it had disappeared. According to B, it had happened 5 seconds ago. B and I checked the rooms upstairs after no sign of A, and became concerned as we descended the metal stairs to search the rooms on the first floor. No sign of A yet. It's starting to worry me, because I know A isn't going to disappear like that, even if we're scared. B and I pick up our pace, and after checking the first floor, we coordinate to jump out of the window we entered and walk around the L-shaped building opposite. As we both bumped into each other, our anxiety was now in jeopardy. A was nowhere to be found.